Exploring Biochar's Horticultural Market Potential. So we have three great panelists today, and I will also be joining. This is going to be a great panel discussion. Please ask any questions you have about the horticultural industry, about how biochar could or is being used from any of our panelists, and we will be more than happy to answer your questions. So my name is Tera Lewandowski. I'm the Director of Agricultural Markets at the US BI. I have a PhD in forestry from UW-Madison. A lot of work there was on just substrate decomposition and nutrient cycling in forests. I've spent 10 years at Scotts Miracle-Gro developing consumer potting and garden soils. And I'm also a board member of the Compost Research and Education Foundation, so looking at compost and how we can use that in different consumer-facing substrates. That's all I'm going to say about me. We have some great panelists today, and I'd like to start by introducing Connie Johnson. Connie?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our panel today. As Tara mentioned, I'm Connie Johnson. I'm a research scientist in the R&D department at SunGrow Horticulture. So quickly, a little bit of information about SunGrow. SunGrow is a leading company in North America. We have about 22 production and distribution facilities in US and Canada. Each year we produce about 70,000 truckloads of horticultural substrates. We produce products that are both retail and commercial products. On the bottom is just some of the logos, different brands of retail products and professional products that we sell each year. Over the past few years, we have mainly produced products that are consisting of peat, perlite, and bark are our key ingredients currently that we use. In the past few years, we have looked at expanding our raw material portfolio to include more sustainable and regionally sourced materials, and those include wood fiber and biochar. Enter? Okay. Okay, so these are the three products, biochar products that we've most recently launched. On the left, we have our two professional products. The professional products, because of the volume that we sell of these products, we sell them in a compressed format, either compressed bales or compressed towers. For example, we have a 3.8 example on the top that expands to 7.6 cubic feet. The bales on the bottom are either 110s or 120s. Those expand to 220 to 240 cubic feet. On the right, we have our retail products, Sunshine Black Bear Indoor-Outdoor Potting Mix. We launched this product about 2 years ago. We currently sell this in box stores, IGCs. So I'm going to go over a little bit of some of the reasons of why did we decide to introduce biochar in our growing medias. As I mentioned earlier, perlite is a raw material that we predominantly use in our raw mixes currently. And we like biochar as a substitute for perlite because both provide excellent aeration and drainage. Both are very lightweight. Which is a benefit when comparing to barks and compost in some situations. So the differences that we like about biochar is that it is a sustainable use of regionally sourced raw materials. We use wood-based biochar that is formed from our forestry residuals. We like the biochar because it has a very rough, angular surface that interlocks very well with some of the other raw materials in our mixes. In some situations, because of the round shape of the perlite, it can sometimes separate in mixes and float to the surface. Other benefits of the biochar that we are wanting to introduce to benefit our growers are the increased cation exchange capacity or the nutrient retention and water holding capacity. So if we can help growers to reduce the amount of fertilizer or the frequency of fertilizer and irrigation, that's a value-added benefit to the mix. We're also looking at the increase in microbial activity. We do have some natural and organic products that have organic fertilizers, so having that increased microbial activity that can help that organic fertilizer be more readily available up front, especially for our greenhouse growers who have short-term crops sometimes that are only a few weeks turnaround. One other benefit is that we do have some customers that produce crops that are either sold to customers such as theme parks, interior scapes, and landscape applications, where they like the aesthetics of the black bear or the biochar. They don't like the white speckles of the perlite, so for some growers, they choose to go with an alternative that is less visual. It's purely aesthetics, still works, but, and the other benefit is that it works for our growers. So when we develop a new raw material, we do our own R&D testing, but we also supply samples to our growers for them to test and make sure it works well as well. And these two photos are just two examples. On the right, we have a grower who's growing Easter lilies. So this is just a commercial florist crop. And on the left, we have a grower who's doing petunia hanging baskets. So very good results with the biochar mix versus the perlite control mixes. One of the observations that was mostly brought up was the enhanced shoot growth as well as better root development. So if we can have earlier root development, it can also help the grower to finish a crop faster and get it out of the greenhouse. So if we can help them with turnarounds, increasing the number of turnarounds in the greenhouse, that's another benefit. That's it.
So next we have Tony Marrero, and he is representing Wakefield Products.
I'm Tony Marrero with Wakefield Biochar, and I think what's exciting about this panel now more than ever, I recognize the unique perspectives of who's sitting up here, where we have a very technical and considerably intelligent Connie's presentation. I'm going to look more at, and less the product, more at the customer and understanding how that market has developed from the customer's experience in use of biochar as well as the demand for biochar. Wakefield is a family business, essentially. My twin brother and I started Wakefield in 2014, and what we had to do is recognize the demand for biochar was so little. We have to build awareness. We have to explain to you not only what biochar is, then we're going to tell you that you want to buy it, and here are the benefits, and then we're going to tell you what it costs, and you got to figure out if that customer is going to resonate enough with that product to want to purchase it. And that was not an overnight process. So Wakefield itself has evolved, has iterated based on consumer information and demand and understanding of what biochar is. So what you have here is a quick snapshot of the line of products we currently have with Wakefield Biochar, and we sell through various big box stores like Walmart. We're now in over 2,700 Walmarts. We're also selling through Home Depot and Lowe's and Tractor Supply and as well as e-commerce marketplaces. But let's see here. Okay. What I want to share initially is just understanding the recognition, especially at this conference, of the environmental impact of biochar and how important that is. And we recognize we're making a difference. And I think that's fantastic. And there's tremendous information about the environmental impact of biochar. And that does tremendous good for the planet and for the world we live in that we're making a difference as individuals by using biochar. And there is data that shows that consumers want to buy a product that is supportive of our environment and our communities, as well as the product that is going to help them with their day-to-day. But I will say that even though there is that demand in environmental impact, the most important part that I've learned about biochar is that it's going to create a better garden. It's going to create a better soil for your trees and shrubs and flowers. And despite the fact that we all want a change, like consumers want a change for the better in what we do as a community or in the world, I'm going to say nobody wants that sacrifice of spending money on a product that doesn't make that garden grow, right? So you have to recognize how to communicate the environmental benefits versus the primary benefit of a healthy lawn or garden. And that's a very important part. So we do recognize the issue of the environmental benefits on our packaging, but primarily it's about how beautiful that tomato looks when you purchase a biochar product. I think that's really important when you're considering how biochar needs to have value as a material. It is not necessarily going to be just a byproduct. Like, make it the product of what you're selling, and that's where Wakefield as a brand has really tried to develop an interest in what biochar can do as a material for horticulture. There is positive feedback on that, where we're seeing an annual growth rate that far exceeds the typical lawn and garden soil conditioners or soil amendments. We're getting positive feedback from Walmart saying that we're outpacing other category products, which means that biochar is in demand. That means that there are customers that they see that word, biochar, and they want it. So we're seeing increased sales in different big box and independent garden centers, which is really positive for everybody, that biochar is something that is being recognized more and more. So just at that point, I'll speak to, and any questions related to the market demand, marketing strategy, and understanding how biochar can be a part of your primary revenue related to it as a material, as a product, and not a byproduct. So there you go. Best soil conditioner for your plants is also the best one for the planet. I think that's real, but let's look at the order of that. It's the best one for the plant, and by the way, it's the best one for the planet. And I think it's incredibly important to understand how to prioritize that message. So we'll see what happens with questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Our last panelist today you're going to meet is Chad Massura, and he's going to tell you about his work with Rosy soil.
Thanks, Tara. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming out. So my name's Chad Massura. I'm the founder and CEO of Rosy Soil. We are a young startup. We launched in 2022. We're all 4 whole people. So starting to try to make waves in the biochar and horticulture space. But at a high level, we craft the highest quality, most sustainable plant care on the planet. I mean, Tony's absolutely correct. Like, it's performance first and then sustainability second. And I think the better we can deliver that message, the better we can expand the reach for biochar. But our core understanding comes from my background. So I grew up gardening. I was a very young soil nerd. I lived with my grandma in Chicago, and I actually asked for potting soil for Christmas when I was 3 years old. That is a picture of me getting potting soil under the Christmas tree. So this stuff runs in my blood. I was kind of born to start this company. And as I kind of went deeper into the hobby, I discovered a lot of the existing inputs in the horticulture industry have pretty questionable and fairly problematic histories. So, peat moss is harvested from peat bogs. Perlite has a really high CO2 footprint. Cocoa coir, which a lot of the industry is now using, is shipped from across the world. And as you start to kind of peel back the layers, you realize that 1, the performance is kind of questionable on a lot of these filler inputs, and 2, the sort of sustainability story is questionable as well. And that just felt wrong, I think, as a gardener. I think you kind of assume that gardening is this wonderful green hobby, and you peel back the layers and it's kind of not. So that's when I got kind of totally obsessed with biochar and started looking at it as an option. And then just to show some of the things that we're sort of seeing in the market. So there is definitely a shift also with kind of younger consumers to shop their values. And we found that about 60% of gardeners are now willing to actually pay more for better products, cleaner products, and higher performant products. And we think that's a wonderful entry point for biochar. But also we've found that performance, especially when you go from peat to char, is a big driver for people. So, the average consumer is about or the average consumer has a 28% satisfaction rate with an existing bag of potting soil, partially because they're filled with a lot of cheap fillers, whereas it's much higher for something like Rosy because of the performance we get out of char. And then lastly, I think, the business, the economics of the product have to work. And so we're seeing that shared with the retailers where they're actually able to drive more incremental revenue by putting biochar on the shelves and giving better products to people. So it's exciting to see kind of all of that come together. And then, the last bit, how we think about it is it's performance plus sustainability. We run our own soil lab. We've done thousands of plant trials. And we're constantly basically pitting how far can we push the edge on a biochar-based potting soil and how much carbon can we sequester in that product. Again, it's not so much for the consumer because the consumer, I think, has a very sort of surface level understanding of what carbon is. But internally, this is what motivates us. This is what motivates our team. This is why we started this company. And so the more we can push the edge on, I think, both performance, whether that's aeration, water retention, the lack of compaction compared to peat, the lack of hydrophobicity compared to peat, I think we can deliver those better values for consumers and start to build a much, much better product. So, we started in the kind of house plant game. We saw a niche there that wasn't really being addressed. We were able to build a really high quality, more premium product there. And then we've taken everything we've learned about how to get biochar to behave like peat and ultimately outperform peat to a slew of other products, and we continue to launch ones. So, we've been having fun. It's been only a couple quick years, but we're now, full chain distribution in Target, big business with Amazon. We're in thousands of independent garden centers, and we're starting to really see the demand start to grow for char. So, it's super exciting and happy to dive into any aspect of it.
Thanks, Chad. I think now we're going to open it up to questions. This is an open panel. If you have a question, please raise your hand. Our timekeeper will bring you the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you all. Wanted to see what are kind of the minimum and maximum mix ratios that you're seeing for biochar application. Connie, I heard you saying that you were using it to subplant perlite, so I'm assuming that's around like 10% or something like that. But then Rosy soil, it feels like you're doing higher quantities, so I'm curious as to the amount that you're using in it, and then the particle size too, if you're using a fine grade in some of those higher application rates, or if you like those bigger, bulkier pieces, mainly in like your general potting soil applications.
For our sun-grow products, we are, like as you mentioned, we're using the coarser, chunkier biochar to replicate perlite. So we're looking at it more for the function of aeration, drainage. So we don't overdo no more than 40–50% because it drains too quickly, so you would be constantly watering. So we try to keep it under that ratio.
So I'll just say that, so we have a rule of thumb. We try to keep it simple for, a broad stroke of users, depending on what's going to happen. And 10% by volume is a nice application rate. When you look at, what you should do with biochar, it seems to work well, generally speaking. So the blends that we use will have, depending on the product, generally around 20% or a little bit more of biochar, knowing that it's going to be blended with existing soil or other potting mixes, allowing to, ultimately get to the appropriate volume for the consumer, whether they know it or not, right? And then we also offer just straight biochar with information on how to apply to 5 to 10% by volume.
Yeah, and then for us, we think about it both in the context of that performance, but then also the ability to sequester carbon in the material. And so we're constantly actually trying to push the edge on what that percentage can be. So it depends on the application, depends on the product, but on the low end, 20–25%, on the high end, 50–60%. And I see a world where that can actually go higher. And part of it is solved by what you described, which is different types of feedstocks end up having different sort of like plateau points. And so if you combine them, you actually kind of cancel out some of the cons, and you can push it further and further. So it's getting different shapes, different particle sizes and also different types of porosity allows you to go higher.
Everybody gets tired of success stories, so tell us some horror stories about biochar coming into your supply chain and you trying to move it out into product, and you learned a lesson because things didn't fly the way you wanted to, or you've been batting 1,000 for the last 14 years, Tony.
No, it's been totally easy, the whole thing.
Well,
Super simple
that's
stuff.
what you get for going to church every day.
Right. No, I think that the real answer is if we had had expectations of instant success, this would have been a nightmare.
Now, what goes wrong on an individual situation where you put something in and you got the wrong result? Not an arc of an industry, but like, you got this stuff in, we blended it up, everything died. For example, the compost story in Vermont. In Vermont, they had a persistent pesticide come in, and the composting didn't take it out, and they sold it in the compost, and it killed all the tomatoes 6 days after they emerged.
That's fair. No, okay, so in reality, there's a lot of quality control and testing before we put something out to customers, but we've had our own little misgivings internally before we put something out there, and I think that's important to also recognize is that you have to take ownership of what goes out into the consumer market well before. You're not just gonna find out. Now, we've had some wonderful social media posts about we spawned some spider infestation with one of our bags somehow, and there was some really interesting things about different kinds of animals that would occur or things. But no, the reality is, and I recommend this to everyone, you have ownership of what goes in a bag, and especially in today with the ease of negative energy and social media, it is really important to recognize the testing and the quality control steps, because 1 gallon of a product can ruin that entire relationship with a retailer or your entire your brand value to the consumer. So fortunately, I don't have that story for you. Thankfully, we were able to get ahead of that and destroy our own garden before we destroyed somebody else's.
I mean, I have a bunch of them. Let's see. Yeah, sourcing compost is the absolute worst. It's definitely the hardest part of my whole job. I thought sourcing biochar would be the hardest thing, and it pales in comparison to sourcing compost. I tried this really cool sugarcane-based packaging because I thought it was super eco and different, and no one had it, and it was like exploding in shipments. And so, it's finding that line, I think, between sustainability and performance. And then you just stressed me out because people always email us because they got their grandparents' plant after they passed, and they got it at the funeral, and they want to repot it, and they want the thing to survive, and it keeps me up at night thinking about keeping some of those plants alive. But yeah, it's all QA, it's all trial and error. Like, you're going to make mistakes, but you just try to get a little bit better every day.
Your bags catch on fire?
Not yet.
Is there any application for biochar on trying to improve mature lawns and golf courses? So not in the construction phase, but in the maintenance phase?
Oh, absolutely, and there's some fantastic research with that. I'm trying to remember the man's name in Chicago that has just done a wonderful job with golf course management using biochar, seeing considerable development of a healthy root system. I think the application of that biochar is really important in the way that you want to also maintain a wonderful customer experience when the golfers are walking along the fairways or on the greens, that you're not turning their shoes black. So you got to recognize, is it pelletized or is it finely ground into a slurry that gets into the grass quickly or into the roots quickly. But it's a wonderful opportunity for golf course management and other landscaping.
Thank you. My question would be around the carbon story. It's my understanding that if the carbon credit doesn't flow with the commodity, the carbon negativity can't be claimed. So kind of how do you guys navigate that carbon story? Do you guys send waivers out that say, hey, you're buying a carbon negative product, but the climate
Yeah.
aspect doesn't flow with the commodity, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, me too. I'll take this. Okay, I'll take this one, and then if you've got. So there is some recent changes to how Puro is handling the transition to like a small bag product in retail channel, where that's certainly now is not being considered part of carbon credits. There's two ways that we've approached that. One is we've actually decided not to associate the biochar in this lawn and garden division to carbon credits. It's just, we want to have that story, and we didn't want to pass that to a carbon credit buyer. So it was important for Wakefield to be able to share the carbon negative story with our consumers, and so we just simply don't offer it for carbon credits. If we were to, prior to this year, I think that would have been totally acceptable, but there are changes to the policies.
Yeah, and on our end, so we buy the biochar, we don't produce the biochar. So the biochar, before the Puro changes, lands at our facility with the credits sold. So the biochar lands net zero, and then all the other activities that we do with the soil add CO2. So the compost has a kilogram of CO2 per quart, the pine bark fines, like all our other inputs have that, and then the transportation and packaging as well. So we've studied basically all of it. We've done a really in-depth LCA on our website, and then we publish, like, on the bag itself, this is how many kilograms of CO2 this product has helped sequester, but we're not like selling those credits, or they're not attached to the product, if that makes sense. But sort of to what I was saying earlier, I'm not sure the consumer cares all that much. It's sort of something that we're excited about and proud of, but at the end of the day, they're buying it because it's the best soil you can buy.
Okay, I have two questions. They're kind of quick, I think, related to some practical things. So for the greenhouse horticultural setting, I know that a lot of those media mixes they use, I don't think it's worth them reusing those mixes. They typically just dispose of them. So my first question is about, is there anything about biochar that would allow it to be reused in some of those mixes? And then my second question is, some of this is being compared to other things that could be in media mixes. Do you all know, have there been any hard studies on, I understand that the biochar can make it where it holds more water, but does it change the overall water demand of the plant growth cycle in any way?
I can speak a little bit to the recycling. We do have some customers, some crops, the mix goes with the plant to the, garden center situation. We do have crops such as like cannabis, herbs, and vegetables, where you have the shoots are harvested, the flowers are harvested, and they may turn that into compost. They may sell it to some other industry to turn into compost. Some companies may try to reuse it themselves. They'll sterilize it, compost it, sterilize it, and try to reuse it. But I think for the most part, a lot of them are concerned about the disease, any diseases that may still be in the root balls, that they often don't want to take the risk of it.
Yeah, and we do talk a little bit about lack of compaction being a benefit of a biochar-based soil relative to a peat or a cocoa-based soil. So that is one of the issues, right? Is like, peat or cocoa after 6 to 9 months is losing a lot of its volume, and the compaction is suffocating those root systems. So you are getting more longevity out of something because the carbon is fixed. But you're still running into the issues that she described with reusing soil.
Thank you. Hey, just interested in intrigued with kind of the evolution of customers being aware of biochar, for example, and any trends that you see, or just trying to, in the marketplace, differentiate your product. There's a lot out there. Is biochar the main differentiation factor? I know you put that second to best soil to grow your plants on, but you know, a lot of products could say that, I guess. So how do you see that trending, customers' acceptance of carbon sequestration and benefits of biochar versus just your overall differentiation factors?
I'll start. Sure. Sure. No, it's a great question. So initially, and I'll say, 2018, 2017 time, there was what I felt very little awareness and understanding of what biochar is with the general consumer market. And so Wakefield recognized, well, it's still a great product. So what you do is you shift the messaging to relate to something that the consumers are used to. And we looked at compost. You know what compost is, right? So I'm going to add this word biochar. It's compost with biochar. And you may not know what biochar is, but that compost bag is all of a sudden $1 more. So it's got to be better, right? And that was the initial intent, was like, let's just position the word biochar in a way that it makes compost look premium. And we would slowly evolve in the messaging on our website and the packaging, and most importantly with the store manager or the retail business buyers and merchants, so that they would understand more and more what the impact of biochar. And for better, what's happening is biochar is becoming more and more trendy. And so that phrase is not as unknown. And we have now shifted to elevating just the word biochar in our packaging. So it used to be, compost with biochar. Now it's like biochar is more important as a word on the package, and that's resonated well as we've created awareness and educated gardeners and farmers and lawn care professionals of what's going on.
Yeah, I think that totally resonates. I mean, I'm kind of seeing the same thing. I think we started where the product just so happened to have biochar in it. Like it was just a really great soil, and it was achieved through, magic almost. But I would say we're seeing something similar where enough consumers know about it that it's pulling the product off shelf. But it's also like weird enough of a word that if you don't know about it, you're now curious about it. And that is also pulling it off shelf. So we're doing the same thing. We're going louder and prouder with biochar, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, good.
This is actually a question for Tony, but also a comment. Were you thinking of Dan Dinelli in Chicago?
Thank you.
Yeah, the
Yes,
golf course
Dan
manager.
Dinelli.
I met him at a golf show. He's a
Yeah,
great guy.
he's
So
fantastic.
I recommend just Google him. You'll find all kinds of videos that he's done about golf course management in general, but also incorporating biochar.
Thank you so much. That is awesome.
Hi, just to piggyback off of Hugh's question about any horror stories, one thing that came across my mind was, when we think about adding biochar into soil and there's kind of a maximum recommendation, I was just surprised that you're really pushing those limits. So what came to my mind is, have you experienced any maybe nutrient imbalances or anything like this, and if so, then what are you, if you can share this, what are you adding to your substrate mix that helps offset that?
I can go. Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is the yield J curve, right? So over a period of time, you're seeing the yield diminish as it's blocking out nutrients, and then you see it start to really take off. And especially on the consumer side, you're fighting that because you want that initial impression to be really strong. And I wouldn't say we're doing anything groundbreaking. We're co-composting, we're inoculating with nutrients and microbes. We're trying, to go a little bit higher on nitrogen or whatever's needed for the given species to try to overcome a bit of that J curve. But we've also found that when you get into, call it month 2 or month 3 or month 4, the gain on yield development relative to a traditional bag of soil is so great that you sort of overcome a bit of that J-curve issue. And so, you know, you may see slightly smaller plants, but you see much better root development or much better fruit yields. And so you kind of like, you can kind of play with that initial experience and still ultimately have a strong grower experience.
One of the other things that when we were first working on our formulations is that we saw very high pHs starting off with some of the higher rates. So one of the things we had to do was adjust our lime rates or increase the amount of starter charge that's in there to help balance some of the alkalinity that, or the liming factor that the biochar introduces to the mix.
Last thing I'll add on that is so Scott's never launched, well, no, that's not true. We launched a biochar soil, but it took a while. And we did see in testing biochars, nutrient tie-up a couple times. But one thing to be cognizant of is when you're reading papers or if someone is testing biochar is how are they fertigating and what is the growth system. And so we had a saying that, like, you could grow a plant in anything if you balance the water and the air right. And especially with some growers who are adding fertilizer, you can go, when you're fertigating, you know, every couple hours, you can go a lot higher in biochar. You're going to beat any tie-up versus if you're dealing with a CRF, a control-release fertilizer, that's going to be a much different environment for the plant roots. So just being aware of, you know, sometimes you read papers and you're like, oh, you can go up to 50% biochar, it's fine, so this paper says it, but you need to be cognizant of all the things they did to grow that plant.
I'll just add one other note. The bags are typically sold as blends, right? So that biochar is in a bag for, we wish it would be, a short amount of time, but it could be on a shelf for a month or two, and it is in that same space, absorbing and integrating with the organics in that bag. So I think there's less concern of that kind of tie-up.
Yeah, that was going to be my question originally, was just if all of you were doing some kind of inoculation or charging of the biochar with worm castings or something else before you sold it, and then if you sell a straight biochar product, do you guide people to do that with it before they mix it in with their soil?
So we do have one product that's just straight biochar, and there's a lot of information on the bag. And of course, I won't say buyer beware, but we do put information to give best practices. And ideally, someone who's buying just biochar is in it because they're aware of it and educated on it. Otherwise, it's going to be an inoculated biochar with what we call carbon boost, which we add a lot of different things to the biochar to allow it to be a much easier and more successful use for the customer. And everything else is a blend with compost or other things.
Can you speak to mixes that are being used in nursery applications? I'm thinking these plants, these trees that are in their pots for a very long time before they're planted in the field. Have you done stuff for nursery applications where it's in the pot for a few years, or can you speak to what changes you might make, if any?
We don't currently have a product that's specifically for nursery. We are headed that way because it does last, it retains its structure for so long. It's similar to like a perlite. So in several months, a year, because you have some nursery crops that can easily be in a container for 18 months, 24 months. So we do like that feature because it will hold up longer than like a composted bark, which can start to break down when it's in a pot that long. So yes, we are looking to head that way, but not currently. We don't have one that's released in the market.
Yeah, to that real quick. If you read, so James Otland has some really interesting papers on stratified media in nurseries and creating perched water tables, and I've always thought biochar would be a great use in that space because when you have, I think he was, in one of his presentations, he talks about point source pollution from the bottom of these pots because you have just nutrient running out the bottom, and these nurseries can be a big source of leaching, and how biochar could act not only to create a perched water table, but also as remediation if you were to layer your substrate. So we never did it, but I think it's interesting.
Could you comment on the use of biochar in industrial spills, things like hydrocarbon or saltwater spills? Is there any benefit in what kind of concentrations might be needed?
So, not exactly. However, Hugh brought up the Connecticut compost and the persistent herbicides, and that is an area, they were pretty clear. They used wood ash in that one from one of the boilers in the area to remediate compost. It's a similar, no, it's a different mechanism, but it's a similar idea of taking a substrate and making it safe for growth. That has been repeated around the U.S.
What's it like to work with the product? I ran a soil blending company for a couple decades, and when we would use vermiculite, it was the worst. When we used perlite, it was probably the second worst. Like if you get just a little bit in your eye would turn red. And so when it comes to biochar, I mean, are there dust issues? And I think this goes to the usability of it in other applications as well. If you want to use it straight up in landscaping applications, if there's going to be dust storms from it and that sort of thing. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll speak to it. As we're using biochar in our bagging, it's horrible. It's a mess, right? However, the way to manage that is you have to understand this is not going into a bag at 0% moisture or 5% moisture. You definitely need to have, I would say, at minimum to me is 30% or higher. And I recognize the weight issue of that, and I think that's a reasonable compromise. But what you have is the dust really is not the problem if you have the right moisture. There is going to be dust as you're using biochar initially in blending. It may dry some, but you will not have that problem in the bag that you receive and using biochar as the customer for sure. I'm trying to think. What was the second part of that question was using.
Oh no, that was it.
Okay. Yeah.
Very illuminating discussion, thank you. This question is more directed towards sun-grow. We know that peat is being phased out in Europe. Is that something that sun-grow is considering, or is the North American market kind of behind in that?
At this time, there are no plans for Canada to restrict any leases for peat harvesting or anything like that. I think one of the biggest differences between Canadian peat bogs and the European peat bogs is there are more restrictions, more regulations, and there's more sustainable practices for managing the peat bogs, harvesting, and restoring than there were for Europe, which is kind of why they are in the place that they are. One of the big differences is that in Canada, we are not harvesting for fuel. So it's for the horticultural industry, I read, I think it was another USDA James Ortland article where the amount of peat bogs is about 0.03% that is and has been ever touched. So Canada has 294 million acres of peat bogs, so 0.03% may be why there's not the concern in Canada that there was for Europe. Absolutely for Europe, they are in a dire situation because it was so poorly managed for so long.
So Outland again, he's USDA? Yeah. He has a really nice paper, I think it's published now, comparing different media inputs in the US and looking at them from environmental and social and different metrics. It's really interesting. I want to say he had a stat in there, don't quote me on this, but it was something like the CO2 released from Canada peat bogs was equivalent to like one corporate plane ride across the US, which granted that's not good, but it's not as bad as people think it is. So I don't know, it's a good paper, check it out.
I have a question about kind of the size of the opportunity here for biochar producers. So if the entire potting industry in the US were to, snap their fingers and perlite was out and biochar was in, what kind of numbers are we looking at? Like volumes? Just to help kind of match what the industry might think. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but like, what is the size of the opportunity and how should we be thinking about that?
I mean, I think about it more as a peat replacement. I know the numbers on peat. So we import 500 million cubic feet of peat from Canada every year. And so if we could replace 100% of that with biochar, it would be quite meaningful.
But, yeah, I mean, it seems like peat replacement is a little further off.
Yeah.
Biochar is kind of a
Yeah.
more angular, inert type material, and peat's kind of a softer and it's.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think peat replacement is kind of more towards like fiber and different versions. It seems like the easiest right now is peat, adding to the peat a little bit. I think the
Yeah.
perlite replacement model that SunGrow is kind of going with just seems like a real, it's a pretty easy swap. But I've tried looking at getting some numbers on what is the volume of peat consumed in the U.S., the volume of perlite consumed in the U.S., and it's been difficult for me to kind of grasp what is the magnitude of the opportunity. And I don't necessarily want to say like, hey, sorry, perlite, you're out forever, but just trying to get an idea, like what would be a 20% market share if we were?
Yeah, I'm just going to maybe try to reframe your question a little bit, because I think the question is how to replace existing media in those mixes. There is a value, I think, also for biochar on its own. Certainly replacing something that's there is a helpful way for the cost of the per unit in making that blend stay kind of at parity with what's already on the market. But I also see the value of biochar in itself without worrying about being a replacement. So that said, I still don't have a number for you. Is saying it's big okay? Probably not. No. How big is that? So there are 30,000 doors of some sort of lawn and garden independent or big box store in the country. Right, and each one, if you look at an aisle that has soil amendments of some kind or potting blends, you can start to do the math there, and I recognize that if biochar was in 10% by volume of all those bags, it's significant. Like, there's not enough biochar, in my opinion, to satisfy what would be the ultimate demand for what can be used in this kind of product. I really wish I had a number for you, and it's something I'd be happy to look up, try to figure that out.
Can I ask about the economics, both from the production perspective and also from the consumer's perspective? So the cost of production relative to, say, the traditional product, and also from the consumer's perspective, like how much of a premium do they have to pay, and how much of a premium will they be prepared to pay?
Yeah, so it's interesting for us. So, and it's helped a lot that the cost of biochar has come down considerably since we first started buying it, but it's still, like, landed biochar is probably still 2 to 3x the cost of landed peat, depending on where you're buying it and what type of peat you're buying. So obviously there's a premium that we have to pass on to the consumer. We have found this weird psychological effect, basically, that people want to trade up for a more expensive product because they expect the performance to be better, and as long as you deliver that performance, you can get away with it. And so we've actually found that going even higher than that kind of threshold works for consumers because they want to trade up. So that's part of why we've gone the direction we've gone, because we had to figure out how to make the economics of sneaking biochar in as a peat replacement work.
Yeah, for SunGrow, because it's a perlite replacement, the price comparison is higher than our perlite is. So it's harder to sell this as a premium to commercial growers just because of the volume they buy. It's hard for them to justify it because they're already operating on such tight margins, especially if you're selling to big box stores like Walmart, Home Depot. It's very, very competitive. It's easier to have that increased price with retail products. But as he mentioned, it's much easier to sell the messaging to them, the benefits of it. So that's where we've seen where that willingness to pay for that premium has been, is in more of a retail market currently. Buying in bulk certainly helps. So that's one thing we're doing is, like with our purchasing department, is negotiating bulk prices, long-term deals, is to help us get the price down so it's more economical for our professional customers as well.
Yeah, so actually kind of piggybacking on that, what do you look for in your bulk suppliers? Kind of multiple points here as far as what quality points are you looking for from these bulk suppliers of biochar? And are you having to deal with multiple regional suppliers to satisfy your market base? And then you already kind of touched on price points, but I'm just curious what sort of sustainable price point you see in this industry for bulk suppliers of biochar.
Yeah, I mean, a bunch of stuff. So are they producing now? Are they at scale? Can they handle our demand? What does the particle size look like? What does the particle shape look like? What does the porosity look like? What's the pH? What's the carbon content? Are you selling credits or not? Are you certified? And then we start to think about regionalization. So yeah, we are sourcing from multiple producers in multiple regions in order to be able to keep up with our demand.
Similar for, I'm sorry.
I say price is probably important in that conversation too. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's similar for SunGrow in that key is carbon content because of the CO2 claims that are made on the packaging. Also volume, can you meet our needs? And we are doing regional, we're trying to do regional suppliers. So one of the challenges of that is if you have 5 vendors supplying the same raw material, dealing with the variations. So because we want to have as much consistency as possible, because we do have some growers who may have a location that's in Georgia and one that's also in Arkansas. So we want, if they're getting material from our South Carolina location for Georgia and our Pine Bluff, Arkansas location for our Arkansas customer, that they're going to have the same growing experience. Their grower isn't going to have to develop 2 different cultural practices if possible. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, is making sure across all of our US and Canadian sites that the physical and chemical properties are relatively similar.
One real quick thing to add to that, just in case people don't know. If you're selling bagged media and it has a fertilizer, it falls under AFCO rules. AFCO is the American Association of Plant Food Control, something like that. Officials. The biochar has to be a minimum of 60% carbon to be included. And if you compost, if you co-compost, it falls, it's a weird one where anything that you compost becomes compost. So just being aware of that and any regulations from AFCO. And again, real quick, if you don't know, manure chars also don't count as OMRI. So if you're, I don't know if you guys are OMRI certified or not, but that would also be excluded if you're certified as OMRI.
I ran a little bit of quick math. You said there was a 500 million cubic feet of peat moss. All right, so if you just multiply 10%, let's just assume biochar is going in with that peat moss at 10%. That's 1.8 million cubic yards of biochar. So roughly 185,000 tons if it's roughly 10 cubic yards a ton. So that's a lot. Right? And so one of the barriers to entry is, I think with the biochar community, we've often been too small to be of value. So if companies want to start integrating biochar into their potting media products, cool, but then where do we go? Where, if there's not enough material to actually get beyond the bench scale and into market, and if the market does like it, that you are not able to back that up, that's a big hindrance. So do those numbers sound about right? And does that kind of obstacle that we need to have enough material to be of interest? Does that sound about right? I mean, I'm talking at a high level of like, okay, for you guys, I mean, for Rosy soil, like, you probably are not having constraints of supply of biochar stopping you from growing. But if you were to significantly grow, you would be facing constraints that you would want to make sure that you have enough supply. And then to what you were saying, Connie, about that the material has to be consistent from one region to another. And that overall we'd be looking at, if we wanted to be a good partner for the potting media industry and say 10% for all the bags, we'd have to have, almost 2 million cubic yards of material consistently available, consistent and reliably available throughout the U.S. Does that kind of add up?
Right, and I agree. It's not going to happen overnight,
Yeah.
for sure. So that's why we're gradually introducing these types of raw materials into current traditional horticulture, because we don't have enough demand or enough supply at this time. So, as you mentioned, he's reducing some of the, he's replacing some of the peat moss for his products, or substituting peat moss, sorry, for his product. For us, we're reducing the amount of perlite we may introduce into our product, or we're balancing the two out. So that, I think it's very important to understand that, yes, we do get, it's not gonna happen overnight, but whatever you can contribute to help us to improve our carbon footprint is much appreciated, so.
Yeah, and I think even at our smaller scale, we're already feeling some supply constraint. I mean, at this point, we feel like we can probably get high temp hardwood char pretty consistently at pretty high volumes in most places of the country, but for some of the alternative feedstocks, they've been pretty hard to source in the places that we want them at the scale that we want them. And so I'm sure, like beer companies, I'd be curious how Scott's looked at it. Like, it's probably an insurmountable challenge to try to go source the same consistent enough biochar in 40 states at the volume that you would need it. We're small enough that we don't have that problem. We can kind of grow into the demand, but yeah, I could see that being a hindrance.
100%. So the one product we have launched is made at one location. They have 38 around the country, and they all have the same label. So if it's in one, it has to be in all of them or none of them, which is difficult.
Yeah.
And maybe I have a question for Tera. So, I mean, there are situations of regionality, right? And so you can, in my opinion, look at, well, in the western region of the country, we're going to have this kind of biochar, and we're going to have to segment out bags with a certain label that's only distributed in that area to be consistent. But there certainly is the question of consistent supply, and it's something that we're all working through and looking at standards and understanding how to correctly identify what kind of biochar you're manufacturing. I love that number that you put out there, and I hope that's a problem we get to all entertain at some point. But it's, the nice thing is that this will be an evolution of biochar in its industry, and I think we'll be able to manage some of these obstacles nicely as a group. It should be fine.
So a lot of the existing biochar sources tend to be byproducts derived from wood-powered power plants and things like that. They make, what falls out of their power plant. They've done it for years. They don't particularly want to play with it. They want you to haul it off. You want it to come in with a set of properties so it can be rolled into your product. Who's going to be the party? Does it have to be repackaged and rehandled and rescreened? Is that something you would consider doing on your end? Because if you're buying it off the power plants, you're not going to tell them to go out and make sure there's no nuts and bolts and hubcaps. So I'm wondering who's the person who, gussies it up and makes it so that it's seamless from there to the customer.
Well, in the case of SunGrow, we partnered with the manufacturer. So we work only with manufacturers who can make adjustments. We have talked to plenty of producers who they just don't have the capacity to give us what we are requesting, and we respect that. But yeah, we try to find producers who have the capacity to alter particle size, feedstock, according to the specs that we're trying to achieve and for our growing media.
I'll add to that. So with Wakefield, we do have what I'll say, a considerable supplier network of partners, so that we can look at regionally what's available. Shipping from Georgia to Washington State's not a good thing for anybody. So in that process of creating a network of suppliers, you also vet the quality controls and management of that partnership, and making sure that the customer experience is exceptional, regardless of where the origin is of the biochar. So if it's coming from a mill as a byproduct, and that mill doesn't have the right kind of char, it's not used. If it's close and it needs to be screened, that's something that Wakefield does, and just recognizes the additional processing costs before we sell it.
Kind of to that point, question, how do you guys find your suppliers? I wish there was USBI has one, it's getting a little dated, so maybe it needs some updating on contacts, but the list of suppliers, maybe it's a good business idea for somebody to put together a website that connects a buyer to a supplier of biochar. But how have you sourced them in the past, and how do you find them? Do you submit RFPs? Do you post something on your websites? How could suppliers find you?
For SunGrow personally, USBI, this conference, we found a couple of potential vendors just through visiting, going to exhibit hall, talking to exhibitors. We also have plenty of companies who just email us. They find us, R&D on LinkedIn, or someone recommended us, and they'll contact, and that will start a process of, we'll have a call just to get idea of general, like how they're producing, their price structuring, things like that. And then we request samples, we'll do, lab analysis internally, externally, and we'll do grow tests to make sure it meets the quality that we're looking for.
Yeah, I would say kind of the same thing. Yeah, scouring the USBI website, asking everyone I know about specific weird types of feedstocks that I'm looking for, and we get a lot of people that reach out to us too. But yeah, that's part of why we're here, is to find good biochar. So.
Let me give a plug to that real quick. If you don't know, American Farmland Trust just launched a map on their website. Please, if you're a producer, go and input your information into it. That's the point of it, is because we want to be able to make those resources available to people who are looking. The other thing I want to add is, if you're wanting to sell to Scott's, they have a regional supply chain that's located in all your regions. They're actually on the ground. They'll come out and see your site and look at what you have, and kind of walk you through how and where feedstocks could be used.
Department Commerce or the Department of Transportation. For example, I'm a DOT, and we have approved products lists. So while most DOTs don't have anything, I just stay tuned, because most of these have to be registered for sale in order for someone to buy them. And so there are lists. It's just that right now it's more person to person, but it's coming to have approved products lists. So type in your local DOT and APL.
I want to ask a question of the other panelists here. I want to ask about fertilizers and how you guys view biochar interaction with synthetic versus organic fertilizers, and if you see there's one that you prefer or one that needs more work.
I'm going to say organic. Because I think that's where we are seeing the most benefit so far, is with our organic fertilizers, because it does seem to be making those nutrients more available up front, or quicker than our standard mixes. So I think the biggest benefit so far is with the organic.
Yeah, we've only done organic trials, so can't speak to the synthetic.
Well, I'll just be political, and I think biochar works with all those fertilizers to make them better. Yeah. No, so the idea is that it is going to allow what you put in that soil as a fertilizer to stay closer and more concentrated, and allow for a better or stronger experience with that fertilizer. We've also not tested synthetic versus organic, but overall, and seeing the research from, especially even if you look at the posters down in the exhibit hall, there's generally speaking an improvement in any of those fertilizers with the addition of biochar. Yeah.
I'm going to ask another question of the panelists. What areas of research would you like to see more work done in that would help you design the next generation of soils that contain biochar?
For Sungrow personally, as I mentioned earlier with her question, it's nursery mixes. Also like fruit, berry crops, because they are such long-term crops. They can be in a container anywhere from 2 years, 5 years, even some blueberry growers may use the same mix for 7 years before they replant. So that's one of the main areas that we would like to see more research or do more research ourselves.
It's a great question. I actually think that for me, it's about the feasibility or the cost savings for larger growers, especially in potted media, and how adding biochar can reduce returns from consumers, disease, or even damage to plants with a healthier root system. So to allow for that economic justification to the larger commercial customer would be great. And I'd love to see more research on that.
And yeah, I think to add to that, the longevity piece that we were kind of talking about earlier, I haven't seen much on that, and I would love to see more on that. And then porosity distribution too. I know people are starting to talk a little bit more about micro and macro pore dominant chars and the differences that they have, but I would love to see more kind of definitive research around that.
I would second the idea of functional longevity of these products. Some way that you can, all things decline over time, and it's really tough on any product to know functional longevity. Yeah. Functional longevity.
And I think that's fair, and depending on the market you're selling into, a lot of things can be considered very seasonal or one season only, and that is maybe not as relevant. But for the larger, the bulk sales, the intent of this biochar industry to get into the more aggressive in large ag or larger growers, that longevity study is critical.
Got one more. Are your products certified organic? And could you speak to what you think the value of organic is with stakeholders, consumers who want to purchase biochar in their products? Do they care?
Yeah, so ours are all OMRI cert, CDFA cert, and it's a total pain in the butt. It's super expensive. It's kind of is what it is. I think it's kind of a cost of doing business more so than anything. I think we didn't see much of a difference switching from not having OMRI on the label to having OMRI on the label, but I think dealing with retailers and the kind of random organic questions you get, you just sort of need it. So I think we end up getting kind of an organic halo. Like I think people assumed it was organic before it was, and now that it's technically organic, it helps maybe a little bit.
For us, I would say for professional or commercial growers, not as much benefit unless they are growing crops that are certified organic. For retail, a few years ago, we saw there was definitely a boost in interest in having more organic products. So it was worth it to invest because, as he mentioned, it is expensive and timely process. A lot of times we will pre-register, pre-launch a product under a conventional label until we get the OMRI certified label registered because it can take several months longer to go through that process. So like with our retail product, we are in the process of getting the OMRI certification finalized. So it's technically an organic product. We just can't say natural and organic. We can't put the OMRI listing logo on there until all the boxes are checked. So, but yeah, I would say it's more worth it on a retail, from what we've seen, it's more worth it on a retail market than professional.
And the word natural is a tough one too, because the state of Oregon does not consider biochar to be natural. So if you have the word natural on a biochar-based product in Oregon, you can't sell the product. Yeah.
One more question?
In,
particle size, and the top 4 specs. Like what's the most important or least important?
I'll just repeat that. What are the top 4 specs, most important, least important?
Yeah, so I'll answer that just from my perspective, looking at what is the customer experiencing, and I'm talking about the homeowner with a garden, that kind of thing. So not as much concern of HC ratios and things like that, but do you think about the usability and the feel of it? You're gonna look at particle size, moisture content, is it heavy bag, is it a light bag? You know, those are points of interest that might sell the bag or not. Is it easy to use? Am I gonna buy a second bag because I enjoyed that? So I'm gonna look at what I put in the bag is gonna have the correct carbon content. I'm gonna make sure it's gonna be a great growing media. But when they see it and use it, I want them to enjoy that part too. And so we look at moisture with particle size, that they know there's biochar in the bag, and they've enjoyed that opportunity to garden with biochar.
Can I ask, what's the use case scenario for something like an orchard or a vineyard? You know, how do you implement biochar to help, reduce having to replant trees? Like, what's the volume, how you apply it, and how often you have to apply it? Just quickly, if someone could address that.
I don't have any experience with orchards, no.
That might be above my pay grade too.
There are people here, though. I've seen presentations on that. We could probably connect you with the right person to answer that question. All right, I think we are out of time. Panelists, do you have any final thoughts or anything that you did not say that you want to get across to the biochar industry before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I'll just make the note that just as Wakefield has grown as a company, and we have seen success, but it did take some time. There was a requirement of patience. That patience is paid off in a lot of ways, where every year we see more and more demand for biochar and gardening and lawn care and all the things that we want to see happen in potted plants. That's a very positive thing, but I also know there's still a lot of work to do. And so, as a company, we're investing in building awareness of biochar and building our brand so that when customers see a package, they feel confident they're buying from somebody that is going to give them a product that's going to work, and they're going to feel good about buying it because it's biochar and it's going to be better for all of us. So, I just recommend you stay the course. That there is opportunity and that demand is growing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we're constantly iterating both the blends, the packaging, our life cycle assessment, like all of the above. I feel like I'm here talking to a bunch of experts, so I would love to hear, even after this, or later you can email us. Like, I would love to hear your feedback if you've tried the product. If you want to check out our LCA and think we did something dumb, would love your feedback there too. Like, this is it's an iterative work in process. So yeah, happy to have that conversation and try to learn together.
All right, well, thank you, everybody, for joining us in this panel. And if you have any more questions, reach out to the panelists afterwards. Thank you.